the tools that we've created have been turned by others into weapons.
Here's the problem. Facebook, it has so much power. It is making a digital clone of our society.
We cannot remain silent in this century.
We need to do a better job of creating a really safe and inclusive workplace.
Build teams of people who believe in something bigger than just what they're working on. This is the biggest opportunity.
This is hope.
Across the vastness of time, the future calls out to us, and we must answer.
Web Summit's massive. I mean, the ability to sell our vision to a crowd of 18,000 people, it was very cool.
The experience has been amazing. We created great connections with people.
We hope that, we're a good alumni to show all the different stages that a young company goes through. And every time we come here, we learn something new, something more, and we recalibrate.
Pitching on center stage was amazing. The exposure in front of 15,000 people, but also you guys brought some of the best investors here.
I am tired of people saying they just can't find good, diverse entrepreneurs to fund. You can address a lot of that, I think, by coming to a conference that has invested the time to make sure you've got diverse people here to network with.
The winner of the pitch competition was able to capture the imagination of, if this works, it's going to be really big.
I think it's a huge opportunity for people who are just starting up their companies to meet the most interesting people. I'd encourage every startup to get involved.
It's a unique opportunity to meet here in Hong Kong, where East meets West, old meets new.
This is the place to come to see the best new startups across Asia.
This is the hottest emerging area in the world right now.
To have a conference of this size that brings talent of this quality from all over the world matters a lot.
It reminds me of something out of Star Wars, like a city of the future.
We live in a world where innovation is actually on the rise everywhere.
For me, there's hope for the future.
This new generation of people, new generation of companies, it is changing the world of technology. It's changing the world.
Imagine for a moment that future generations could reach back in time to speak to you. What would they say? Would they despair? Stop. We've no idea what's yet to come. Or would they give hope? Never stop trying for a better tomorrow. Keep imagining, believing, dreaming. Would they tell us of new machines, the secrets of progress? Would they plead with us to care for our world? The very nature of communication will grow in ways you can't possibly imagine, and it will change us forever.
These companies have incredible power.
You're going to hold the companies to account.
Data demands that there be regulation.
It's not being seen to do the right thing, it's about actually doing the right thing.
This future is arriving so fast that it becomes increasingly difficult to say what shape it will take.
The tools that we've created have been turned by others into weapons.
Here's the problem. Facebook, it has so much power. It is making a digital clone of our society.
We cannot remain silent in this century.
We need to do a better job of creating a really safe and inclusive workplace.
Build teams of people who believe in something bigger than just what they're working on. This is the biggest opportunity.
This is hope.
Across the vastness of time, the future calls out to us. And we must answer.
Web Summit's massive. I mean, the ability to sell our vision to a crowd of 18,000 people, it was very cool.
The experience has been amazing. We created great connections with people.
We hope that, we're a good alumni to show all the different stages that a young company goes through. And every time we come here, we learn something new, something more, and we recalibrate.
Pitching on center stage was amazing. The exposure in front of 15,000 people, but also you guys brought some of the best investors here.
I am tired of people saying they just can't find good, diverse entrepreneurs to fund. You can address a lot of that, I think, by coming to a conference that has invested the time to make sure you've got diverse people here to network with.
The winner of the pitch competition was able to capture the imagination of, if this works, it's going to be really big.
I think it's a huge opportunity for people who are just starting up their companies to meet the most interesting people. I'd encourage every startup to get involved.
It's a unique opportunity to meet here in Hong Kong, where East meets West, old meets new.
This is the place to come to see the best new startups across Asia.
This is the hottest emerging area in the world right now.
To have a conference of this size that brings talent of this quality from all over the world matters a lot.
It reminds me of something out of Star Wars, like a city of the future.
We live in a world where innovation is actually on the rise everywhere.
For me, there's hope for the future.
This new generation of people, new generation of companies, it is changing the world of technology. It's changing the world.
Imagine for a moment that future generations could reach back in time to speak to you. What would they say? Would they despair? Stop. You've no idea what's yet to come. Or would they give hope? Never stop trying for a better tomorrow. Keep imagining, believing, dreaming. Would they tell us of new machines, the secrets of progress? Would they plead with us to care for our world? The very nature of communication will grow in ways you can't possibly imagine, and it will change us forever.
These companies have incredible power.
You're going to hold the companies to account.
Data demands that there be regulation.
It's not being seen to do the right thing, it's about actually doing the right thing.
This future is arriving so fast that it becomes increasingly difficult to say what shape it will take.
The tools that we've created have been turned by others into weapons.
Here's the problem. Facebook, it has so much power. It is making a digital clone of our society.
We cannot remain silent in this century.
We need to do a better job of creating a really safe and inclusive workplace.
Build teams of people who believe in something bigger than just what they're working on. This is the biggest opportunity.
This is hope.
Across the vastness of time, the future calls out to us. And we must answer.
Web Summit's massive. I mean, the ability to sell our vision to a crowd of 18,000 people, it was very cool.
The experience has been amazing. We created great connections with people.
We hope that, we're a good alumni to show all the different stages that a young company goes through. And every time we come here, we learn something new, something more, and we recalibrate.
Pitching on center stage was amazing. The exposure in front of 15,000 people, but also you guys brought some of the best investors here.
Please welcome to the stage CEO and co-founder of Collision and Web Summit, Paddy Cosgrave.
Wow, you're all incredibly welcome to the official opening night of Collision and to our very first Collision in this incredible city of Toronto. A huge round of applause to all of you. So, I love this part. We're joined by attendees from more than 125 countries around the world. And I'm going to call out a few countries, kind of louder party-type cultures. And I kind of want to hear you. There might be many of you, but you always make a lot of noise. Anybody here from Mexico? Anybody here from Brazil? And then the loudest country on earth, anybody here from the USA? There's a lot of people. So the next 3 days and 4 nights are all about networking, meeting each other, and you just never know, even right now, who's sitting beside you. We've got some incredible people dotted across the crowd. So we have a little tradition at Collision, and we're going to implement it in a few moments. I'm going to ask everybody to stand up that's been seated for quite some time, and I want you to turn, all of you, to 3 people and just introduce yourself. And then we'll sit down again and just see who you meet. Let's go for it. Everybody, here we go. Let's stand up. Where are you from? Getting everybody to stop. Wasn't that fantastic? That was great. That was amazing. Something else that's particularly amazing in my mind is Toronto. At a time when other places in the world are becoming more closed, Toronto remains an incredibly welcoming and cosmopolitan city, and we're incredibly grateful to be here. I think this is important. Over the last hour, we heard from a lot of Canada's most exciting entrepreneurs and startups who are pitching on this stage. For almost all of them, it was their very first time ever pitching to an audience of this size, and I'd love you to show a huge collective show of appreciation for them. So before I introduce Prime Minister Justin Trudeau, I want to tell you the short story of how Collision came to Canada. A little over 5 years ago, a former Canadian diplomat turned venture capitalist who you saw on stage earlier, Sunil Sharma, called me. He told me that Toronto was the next big thing. It was going to be the future tech capital of the world, and we had to do Collision in Toronto, and we were silly to do it at the very start in Las Vegas. I remember at the time calling friends in San Francisco, most of them, just asking them what they thought of this idea. Should we do a tech conference in Canada? And at the time, they just completely dismissed the notion. They thought it was silly. But Sunil is proficient at pestering. And for years, he kept telling me that Toronto was the perfect city. There were emails, there were coffees, there were texts. And for years, I ignored Sunil. And then finally, 2 years ago, I just agreed to save my inbox that I would at least just fly to Toronto, exactly 2 years ago this week. And I remember driving in from Pearson International Airport, which many of you have done, and just looking out of Sunil's car window. And it had never dawned on me just how big Toronto actually was. I was blown away, and I think it's Canadians are notorious, if that's the right word, around the world for their humility and generally just being very soft-spoken. But the kind of underbelly of that is that oftentimes I think Canada short sells itself on the world stage. Certainly in the case of Toronto, I was sure in my mind, having met a lot of Texans, that the likes of Dallas and Houston were far more important global cities. But that wasn't the case at all. Toronto... So, over the next 24 hours with Sunil, I met so many incredible startups that I really had never imagined would exist in Toronto. And I also met an incredible Mayor John Tory, who was not just passionate about his city, and the Raptors, I should add, but about growing the role of entrepreneurship and startups within Toronto itself. And it was really from that kind of moment on that I knew something that I think a lot of people around the world, in my belief, still perhaps to this day hadn't realized, and that's that Toronto had firmly arrived on the world's tech scene. And so 1 year ago, when we announced we were moving Collision out of the United States entirely and making Toronto our new home, a lot of good people were shocked. There were tweets, there were emails, there were all sorts of stuff from friends in Silicon Valley who I genuinely trust, just saying things like, it'll never work, people will never fly there, if you still have time to change, you should rethink, it should be San Francisco. But guess what? Sunil, as annoying as he was right all along, and I'd like to thank him a huge amount for bringing us here. Over the last week, a lot of people had assured us that opening night would be very subdued. You really wouldn't get much of a show up at all because it's a public holiday, and people just wouldn't show up. And I think they also kind of misread the sentiment in this city and in this country. The appetite for tech and for startups is huge. And I hope the nearly 1,000 journalists flying in from around the world write that into the many stories that they'll be printing coming out of this event. That's my son, Cloud, if anybody So there are more than 70 trade delegations from around the world with us tonight because of the work of the Canadian government, and in particular the work of Canada's rather excellent Chief Trade Commissioner, Ailish Campbell, and her team, who deserve a huge, huge round of applause. Now, we're excited to kick off the evening, and who better to begin than Canada's Prime Minister? Since taking office in 2015, he's been at the forefront of a revolution in Canadian tech. The Prime Minister, in my view, as a European, has helped put Canada firmly on the global tech map. We're excited to have him at the very first Collision in Canada. So please welcome to the stage, in conversation with Broadband TV's founder, the incredible Shahrzad Rafati, our first speaker, the Prime Minister of Canada, Justin Trudeau. Woo!
It's great to be here, and it's great to have Collision in Toronto with so many entrepreneurs.
Welcome to Toronto, everyone.
It's also a truly honor to sit next to our Prime Minister here. I'm very looking forward to our conversation today, and as the founder and CEO of Broadband TV, who has built a global leader out of Canada, we had our successes and challenges over the last 14 years. And I would say one of the biggest challenges that we face, and I'm sure many of the leaders, Canadian leaders, probably would share this with us, is access to talent. And to be able to actually kind of really access high-quality talent quickly enough. When you're looking at November, the unemployment rates reached the lowest point, which is great for our economy, but at the same time, obviously, it's making it more difficult for us to really access the best talent quickly enough. So I would actually love to hear your thoughts, Prime Minister, in terms of what are your plans in investing in our local talent and increasing the STEAM seats across universities and colleges, so we actually kind of really see greater success across Canada, not just the tech industry, but as a whole across all industries.
Well, there's no question that as the world is changing to being more of a knowledge economy, more tech, more innovative, access to talent is going to be at the core of success for businesses, for economies, for entire countries. And that's why Canada, even though we've been a country that has always had great natural resources, and we will continue to, we've always layered onto them innovation and talent on top of it. But that's really come to a head recently as we've determined that the Canadian advantage is in providing extraordinarily well-educated, hardworking, forward-thinking, creative, ambitious Canadians to be part of the global economy. So access to talent obviously comes from immigration, and it comes from training up and educating Canadians right. First of all, on immigration, we're at a time right now where big countries around the world are closing themselves off a little more to immigration at a time where Canada is realizing that we need to stay open, we need to make sure we're drawing in the best and the brightest from all around the world. So one of the things we did was bring in a global skills strategy. So at the same time as the United States, to give a direct contrast, has made it more difficult to bring in global talent into your businesses, into your companies, we've said, well, you know what? If you're bringing in global talent, you're also creating jobs and opportunities for Canadians. So the global skills strategy gives you 2 weeks. It'll take 2 weeks to bring in top talent from around the world in particular industries. So we know that bringing in great immigration from around the world is a big piece of it. But the flip side of it is making sure that we're giving the right opportunities to Canadians, investing in research and innovation, boosting post-secondary education, making sure there are more coding programs for elementary and high school kids, making sure that we're ensuring that Canadians see a path for them in the technological, the disrupted future we're part of. There's a lot of anxiety that people are feeling all around the world, and it's coming out in all sorts of different ways, whether it's populism, whether it's nationalism, whether it's Canada is making sure that there is room for everyone to succeed, everyone to feel like there's a path forward for them and their kids in technology. And that's why we can be investing in AI the way we are. We can be investing in tech the way we are, and it's not a source of anxiety for Canadians because they're being brought along with it. And that's a key part of making sure that there is the talent that global companies need when they want to set up in Canada, where we have an incredible diversity that allows you to plug back in right around the world.
So you touched on global talent stream, and I would say that as a company, 50% of my leadership team, including myself, we are immigrant, first-generation immigrants, and immigration plays a very important role when it comes to, growing the tech sector. But at the same time, speaking of global talent stream, it's a great program, but the categories of occupation is very limited. It's not as broad. And when you're looking at LMIA and other programs, the process time, ease of entry, and the relevancy of the categorization is not there. I know that we've made a lot of progress, and we had great success with the programs. And I would love to know what are the steps that we're taking to make sure the same acceleration and process time that we see with the global talent stream, we can see it across all the application programs that are out there.
Well, the global talent program is a small and targeted program for very specific industries. But on top of that, we also take in more immigrants per capita than just about any other Western country in the world. We take in about 350,000 immigrants a year, knowing that drawing in people from around the world who want to build their communities, build a better life for themselves, build opportunities for their kids is a key way to grow. Now, we're always looking at ways of facilitating growing our communities, growing our companies, growing our workforce. We're going to always make sure we're doing it in the right way, though. I mean, we need to make sure that we're drawing in people who are going to be able to contribute and grow, and that at the same time, we keep one thing that's really, really precious and unfortunately a little bit rare right now around the world. Canadians remain positive about immigration. As we see anxieties and worries and people closing in around the world, Canadians know that we get more resilient communities, we get better solutions, we get better innovation when we bring in people from all around the world. That's why we are doing well at a time even of anxiety. We've seen the Canadian economy flourish over these past years. We've seen Canadians' confidence increase in their own future. We've seen the lowest unemployment in 40 years, as you've pointed out. We've added 1 million jobs to the economy. And the way we've done that is because we've made sure that there is a clear message, that there is room for everyone to succeed, and there are investments that make sure that everyone has a path to success. It's when you start seeing those digital divides of people excluded that we get into troubles as communities and as societies.
I think speaking of, that's fantastic. I think speaking of talent, from my experience, talent wants to live in clean, green, and affordable cities. And when you're looking at the tech industry, is obviously one of the fastest growing industries, and the demographic within the companies are younger. And the millennial generation, in Canada overall, would be representing 50% of the population by 2020. And I would love to know, what are your plans in terms of having the federal government play more of an active role in making our cities more affordable for the younger tech workforce across the cities in Canada?
Yeah, that's a great question. It reminds me of when I was just starting out as a politician. I went to visit Kitchener-Waterloo's Communitech, which is a great incubator, a great place that is getting all sorts of startups. And I was talking to all the various tech companies What is it that a future federal government led by me could do to help you out? What is it that you really need from the federal government? I'm expecting, tax credits or research grants or immigration stuff, and yes, those came. But the number one thing they said, we need infrastructure. We need a fast train from Kitchener-Waterloo to Toronto. We need to make sure we're investing in connecting people with bricks and mortar so that they can flourish in ecosystems that are creating the kind of solutions we need. So I said, okay. One of the things we did when we took office 4 years ago was put forward the largest infrastructure investment plan in Canada's history, about $180 billion over the next 10 years that involves high-frequency rail. It involves things like public transit, investment in community infrastructure, green infrastructure, rebuilding and strengthening our cities and our communities right across the country. The flip side of that is you talk about affordable. I've spoken with John Tory, the Mayor of Toronto, who is just here, or is here today, a number of times. We see an issue where it's harder and harder for millennials to actually be able to buy their first homes. And they're delaying their entrance into sort of the home ownership equity building phase of their lives. And that's something that we tangibly wanted to turn around. So we created something called the First Time Homebuyers Incentive, which basically is a no-fee, no-interest mortgage. It's going to reduce people's first home purchase mortgage payments by hundreds of dollars a month. So there's tangible things we're doing to make cities more livable. On top of that, we've done things like Smart Cities Challenge to try and spur innovation, and we're investing in the kind of social innovation infrastructure, things like a Canada Child Benefit, things like increasing seniors benefits, Canada Workers Benefit, Canada Training Benefits, the kinds of things that are going to allow people to actually feel like there is room for them to succeed in our communities, in our cities, while we're building a better future. We can't just race forward into the future for a few with the tech brilliance we have in this room and sort of shrug at everyone who's being left behind. You can't do that and be a solid, stable country or society. You need to bring people along, and that's the balancing act and the investments we're making on both sides of that to make sure that everyone can see themselves reflected in a stronger future.
Thank you for that. So we all know that funding is a key factor in terms of building companies and scaling businesses. And when I started my business, the landscape was very different, and financing was definitely a challenge. And things have changed significantly since then. You look at 2018, we had $3.7 billion of VC money that was dispersed across Canadian companies, which is great and is a signal for maturity. But at the same time, when you're looking around, in the tech sector at $1 billion plus or $10 billion plus market cap companies, we still have a long way to go, and we need to build a much stronger and healthier ecosystem so we would actually have the next Amazon, Google, and Microsoft built out of Canada. And at the same time, the federal government supports many other industries, through grants, other incentives, tax deferrals, tax credits. Knowing that our industry is growing faster and creating more jobs, how can we have the federal government providing similar benefits and advantages to the tech community?
The fact is, no government has ever invested as much in the tech sector, in innovation, in research, as this government over the past 4 years, because we know it is an essential path to the future. Whether it's having invested hundreds of millions of dollars in venture capital frameworks, whether it's making sure that we're investing in research and fundamental science, in things like AI. We did about $125 million direct for AI right across the country. We've created superclusters, which are hundreds of millions of dollars. We know that investing in universities, in research, in innovation, in training are the kinds of things that are going to give us the best returns in the future. So those are investments that we've made and we will continue to make, because we have seen a lot of, we've spent a lot of time trying to compete with Silicon Valley, or watching Canadian innovators head down to the Bay Area to try and succeed. And what we've seen over the past few years is increasingly people are coming back for the quality of life, for the stability, for the access to global talent through our immigration, through the livable cities, through all the different things we're doing. Plus, a lot of people are bringing a lot of capital back with them from Silicon Valley because people are realizing there are a lot of amazing opportunities to invest here in Canada. We have a number of big companies that have decided to return to Canada, to come to Canada. Thomson Reuters, a few years ago, moved its global headquarters from the United States back to Canada, where it is flourishing because of the access to talent, because of the innovative ecosystems. We are really seeing that this is one of those places where the mix of opportunity, of diversity, which I sort of glossed over earlier. I mean, we know that when you have different perspectives, different backgrounds, different stories coming together to work on a same problem, you get much better, more robust and resilient solutions. So the fact that Canada is a country that has always embraced diversity, and we know that it is a source of strength, never a source of weakness, has given us a real advantage as we look at that competitive investment environment that more and more people are looking at Canada for.
Do you think we're doing as much as what we're doing with the other industries? Like, knowing that, again, some of the staple industries like oil, gas, forestry, mining, they do have access to more subsidies. What does it take for us to actually have the tech sector, getting to a place that would have access to similar scale of benefits?
Well, I think every sector is different and has a need for different things. We are phasing out all the extra help we're giving to the oil and gas sector, for example, because we know we got to move towards a lower carbon economy. So every sector will respond to the needs. And what I hear most clearly from the tech sector in the needs are making sure they have access to capital, making sure they have access to talent, and making sure they have access to procurement opportunities. And those are the kinds of things that we're moving forward quickest on. I have no difficulty having confidence in the tech sector's ability to create success, to generate wealth, to create opportunities. We just need to make sure that the infrastructure is there for you to be able to succeed. So we will always support the tech sector as much as it needs to, recognizing that the impacts of the tech sector go through the entire economy, and therefore the benefits need to be felt throughout the economy as well.
You touched on the VC community, and part of it, in terms of the programs that are in place from, VCCI, VCAA, $400 million in terms of, collaboration with the VC community. I want to know what are the steps that, you plan on taking in further bolstering the VC community so we can scale the business and going back to building, much larger, 10 billion market cap businesses.
I think we've recognized that one of the really big challenges in Canada is getting from that, $10 million to $100 million size of company. I mean, there's such a tendency now, and not just in Canada but around the world, to reach that, particular moment and then sell out to a much bigger company and retire. That has been a model for a little while, and we're really looking at how we can make sure that people have the confidence in their own abilities, in their own success, and in the ecosystem that's going to support them, to make them say, no, you know what, I don't want to sell out to a Google or a Microsoft or a big company. I want to build the platform here in Canada, and that is the path that we're working hardest on right now. And the factors that go into that isn't just the government saying, here's some money, you can now succeed. It is actually creating an environment for you to be able to succeed, where you have that access to talent, where you have that access to global markets. I mean, just in terms of trade, Canada is now the only G7 country with a free trade deal with every other G7 country. We have preferred access to 2/3 of the global GDP right from Canada. Obviously, access down south with the renewed NAFTA that we're in the process of moving forward on, access to Europe with the CETA, the Canada-Europe Free Trade Agreement, and then access to Asia with the CPTPP, and it's continuing to grow. We're going to continue to make sure that Canadian companies have privileged access to the world's markets in a very positive way, because that kind of trade ends up flourishing, benefiting all Canadians. And that's the argument that we've been making, and we've been seeing it happen as our economy is growing faster than many other countries. We have one of the lowest debt to GDP ratios, stable legal system, stable banking system, the kinds of things that people are looking for in a world of uncertainty. Canada is providing and continuing to build on.
So speaking of investment and touching on foreign direct investment, we know that 1.9 million Canadians are employed by foreign-controlled entities, and that is 1 in 8 Canadians. And when you're looking at the numbers from 2008 to 2018, Canada, as being a international hub for business, has attracted $824 billion. And when you're looking at the year-over-year growth from 2017 to 2018, that was 60% growth rate in comparison to what we saw across the globe that was down by 20%. So clearly, Canada is very attractive for investment. And I want to ask you this question. What is your elevator pitch for companies that want to grow their business out of Canada? Why should they choose Canada?
Access to global markets through our free trade deals, access to incredible talent through our great education system and our immigration system, strong, resilient communities that embrace within them the diversity of the entire world, that understands how to be part of global markets, global supply chains, a quality of life that is based on being there for our neighbors and leaning on each other. Something about the winters here makes us understand we have to lean on each other to make it through them. But more than that, we understand that standing up for each other's rights and creating strong societies doesn't need politics of division and attack, can bring people together. This is a good place to set down roots. This is a good place to build a company. It's a good place to build a future. We've got socioeconomic, fiscal, banking, legal stability that is world-class. And we're a country qui le fait dans les 2 langues en plus, donc on a l'accès à la planète en français et en anglais. We have access to the planet in French and English.
It would also be great for us to maybe talk about organizations like Invest in Canada that were put in place to really facilitate, promote, and accelerate investment in Canada. What do you see as the role of those organizations and the importance of those organizations in terms of increasing foreign direct investment?
Well, I think one of the things that people are looking for, I mean, there was a time where, massive tax breaks to get you to move to this particular community or that community was driving a lot of decision. I think people are now making decisions slightly on a more quality basis, slightly on a longer term basis. And what we've realized is, even though Canada already has one of the top ratings in terms of ease of doing business, ease of starting a business in Canada, lowest small business taxes in the G7, the lowest startup capital costs of lowest overall tax burden on new businesses, even compared to the United States. We've got a lot of advantages. What people often need is a one-stop shop to help them navigate through starting a new business. One-stop shop is going to connect with all the different government agencies, set you up locally, guide you in the process of investing in Canada and creating a new office, a new space. That's what the Invest in Canada Hub is all about. It's about making sure that you have that support, that concierge service, while you are about to invest and draw on the extraordinary Canadian talent that you're looking at harnessing for the future of your company.
Great. So as a female entrepreneur, I'm very much so passionate about gender pay, and I'm very proud to say that gender pay at BBTV is 0%. And we know that half of the population of the planet are women, and more than half the women don't have their own income. That is a quarter of the potential workforce that could be contributing to stronger economies. Now, closing the gender pay gap will contribute $28 trillion to global GDP, which is a 26% increase. In Canada, that will have a $150 billion impact by 2026. And I would actually like to ask the leaders in this room that don't actually practice gender pay and that don't have a 0% gender pay gap to really think about why that is the case and do something about it today. That said, you are a thought leader, you're a global leader on this issue. Canada is a global leader on this issue, but it seems that it's taking too long for us to really experience significant improvements. What does it take to have men and women get paid equally in Canada? And how can we accelerate the process?
We are seeing significant improvements, but you're absolutely right. It's one of those things where even with all the work we've done over the past few years, the pay equity gap in Canada is larger than some countries. You wouldn't think we'd have larger gaps then. That's why we're working on closing it. We're moving forward with a proactive pay equity regime that is going to transform that in a very active way that we're very excited about, but that's something we moved forward with just last year. We also know that making sure there are opportunities for women in all levels, including in the C-suite, is essential if you want to succeed. It's not just a moral right thing to do. We've now seen it's the smart thing to do. We know that diversity and resilience go together. We know that having 40, 50, 60% women on your board, in your organization, leads to better outcomes, and increasingly, companies are understanding that and moving forward in a very aggressive way. We've put in specific investments for women entrepreneurs. Part of the VC funding goes specifically towards access to capital for women startups, for women-led startups and companies. We know that that's one of the easy ways to massively boost our output is to empower too many of these women who've been just left aside because of the patterns that have led for too long in so many industries, including the tech industry. We know that empowering women to succeed makes it better for everyone. That's why Canada's going to keep doing it.
So I know that we don't have much time left. I wanted to finish the conversation by talking about digital trust. I know that you were in Paris last week and you met with other global leaders alongside head of tech companies around discussions with respect to Christchurch, and you unveiled your digital charter focusing on 3 areas, from data ownership, privacy protection, and dissemination of hate online, and that you did say that platforms that do not comply will have a heavy penalty. And as a tech leader, obviously we would love to have clear guidelines, and where we would receive clear guidelines from all the global leaders. And I do believe that a country-specific plan would be very difficult and unrealistic to implement. So what do you think is the role of the government and the tech community in working together to keep our citizens safe around the globe?
Well, I think you've just highlighted. I think it's all about working together. I mean, yes, governments can lay out guidelines and recommendations and indeed penalties if we have to, but we'd much rather be able to work with tech companies. We'd much rather be able to work with platforms to make sure citizens are safe, to make sure their data is safe, make sure that the kind of online aggression, terrorism, disinformation, nastiness that you wouldn't allow in a public space, you wouldn't allow in a real space, shouldn't be happening when people spend so much more time in virtual spaces. Now, we all know we need to protect freedom of speech, we need to make sure we're protecting people's rights, but we always have to find that balance. We always have to make sure we're protecting rights and keeping people safe at the same time. Physically in the real world, but increasingly in the virtual world. And governments, as you all know, take a long time to adjust to new realities. And that's why working in partnership with the platforms, with the tech companies, to reassure citizens who, quite frankly, are really worried. People know that they have a tremendous amount of data that's vulnerable out there. People know that their kids are exposed to God knows what on the internet. They need to know that they have partners out there, in governments, sure, but also within the platforms and the tech companies as well, that are thinking about how we create a safe and flourishing and growing society. We need to leave room for innovation. We need to leave room for challenging disruptions. But we have to make sure at the same time that we're keeping people safe. And the only way we're going to do that is by having frank and open conversations with the big platforms, with the tech companies, with all of you about how we're going to ensure that the way we move forward into this brave new world of technology and solutions is a way that keeps people safe as we move forward. I'm excited about having these conversations. I've launched some great conversations with a number of big tech leaders, and I know that all of us want to be part of building a better future. That's why we're here. We just have to think about all the different aspects of that better future, and that's something that Canada is going to lead in as well.
So we just ran out of time, but I wanted to see if you have any additional thoughts or comments. We covered a range of topics, and it's been great to hear your thoughts on all these topics. Do you think we left anything out?
I'm just really excited to welcome you all to Toronto, to Canada. Tell you you're going to have a great few days. I challenge you to think big, to challenge each other, but also think about the kind of communities and the kind of world that you're going to be building with the technologies that you're leading. And as you do that, as you lead your way forward, as you create tremendous success for you and your companies, try and think about how you're making sure to bring along the rest of society with you. Because if we don't succeed together, we're all going to fail separately.
Thank you so much, Prime Minister.
That was great.
Merci tout le monde.
Okay. I was backstage. I actually did update my LinkedIn profile to include annoying in the skills and experience. I think actually that's sort of worth something now. I want to thank the Prime Minister of Canada. That was an incredibly inspired set of remarks, and this government has shown true leadership on the innovation file, and we're very thankful for that. So the next two speakers we have each built something remarkable from the ground. The first is the co-founder of one of the leading cybersecurity companies in the world, and the second is taking the world by storm with her creative voice in music. We're going to ask these trailblazing Canadians to come out here on stage to share their success stories and provide some guidance and inspiration to those of us in the room that are looking to do the very same. Please welcome, in conversation with Lindsay Turrentine of CNET, the co-founder of Cloudflare, Michelle Zatlyn, and singer-songwriter Jessie Reyez.
Hi, that is a hard act to follow, but you are going to be so glad that you're here for this conversation. I am really excited to talk to two creators. I think in this economy, everybody is a creator. Everybody is creative. You have to be. And we have two women here who have created very different, but both really amazing things. And I wanted to ask you both. You're both Canadian. Jessie, you're Canadian and Colombian. You've both done a lot of work in this country, but also outside of this country, so you've taken your powers with you. How is that experience of working abroad, exporting yourself, being an import, which is something that you sing about a little bit, Jessie. How has that affected the work that you do?
I think that coming from Toronto particularly, because I feel like the city is very well known for its multiculturalism, it gives you an edge when you walk outside and you're working with people in different countries, but you've already experienced that in your own country, that it just gives you a different perspective, you know, a different perspective from your own. And then that just enables more creativity because now you're wearing other people's shoes.
And now you can take your message to so many different people and know that it will resonate with them too. They understand it. Michelle, how about you?
You know, Malcolm Gladwell has this really great research that shows that some of the best entrepreneurs are the ones who are outsiders, who faced adversity early on. And I grew up in Saskatchewan, which I live in San Francisco now. Yes, exactly, the wheat fields of Saskatchewan, go. And what I tell people from when I'm in the United States, and I tell people I grew up in Canada, and they say, oh, where from? I say Saskatchewan. They're like, that's so cool. And when I tell people in Toronto or Montreal or Vancouver I'm from Saskatchewan, they make a funny joke and they make fun of me. And so I think that I think there's something to Malcolm's research of where you just look at his research and it basically says if you're an outsider, if you're left-handed, you face adversity, you actually build up the resilience to keep going, and they make better. A lot of those people go on to do really great things in their life. And so for me, growing up in Saskatchewan and then now living in the United States and building this global company, I think that there's this grit or diversity to keep going. And so I encourage all of you who, if you've faced hard times or are facing hard times, like keep going, because if you're onto something, it'll make you stronger and better long term.
One of the things that we were talking about backstage, I'm also from a small rural place. Sometimes it's surprising when you put your name in the bucket and your name actually gets pulled, you get picked. And I think that changes your perspective on things a little bit, especially if you're not from LA and you're in the music industry, you're not from Silicon Valley, you're succeeding there.
I'll have a funny story to tell you. I couldn't agree more. So I was living in Toronto for 6 years. I went to McGill, lived in Toronto, was working, and I really wanted to go to business school. And I was applying to all these business schools in Canada, and I was at a cocktail party and literally talking to kind of a stranger, and I said I'm applying to business school, and they're like, oh, where are you applying? And I named the schools, like Rotman and Schulich and all the Canadian schools. And he looked me in the eye and he said, why are you applying to Harvard? And I kind of thought, well, it's really competitive. There's like 0% chance I'm going to get in. And he kind of looked at me in the eye and he said, if you don't put your name in the hat, it'll never get pulled. And because of that one conversation from someone I really did not know, I actually ended up applying and I got in. And I just remember showing up there being like, I can't believe I did this. And again, the idea is that if you don't put your name in the hat, you'll never get pulled. There's no way someone's going to come knocking on your door. And I guess there's two sides of that story. So if there's something you really want to do, try. And on the other flip side, if you're talking to somebody and they say they really want to do something, be the person who says you should try and do it. Put your name in that hat, because it can really make that huge difference.
To what you said, I totally like the whole idea of failing faster is something that's really helped me in auditions and when I was making songs and handing out mixtapes to everybody, because the people that say no is just, it's fine. It's just a step closer to the person that's going to say yes, or a step closer to the person that's actually going to support you. You just need to try and fail faster.
I love that message, and I've done some reading about some of the pushing that you started busking.
Yeah, busking.
Here, right?
Yeah.
And so what were some of the things you did early in your career to keep pushing? Were you handing out CDs?
Everything. I used to record myself. I used to make these awful songs, and back when you could burn CDs, I would burn my own CDs and I would put my name, Jessie Reyez, and I would put my number and I'd bless the CD and I'd have them in my purse. And just doing out of the ordinary things. Like there was this club called Government in Toronto, and I know all the partiers up here are like, oh yeah. Okay, so at this club called Government, years ago, I just turned 19, and I always walked around with them on me because I was just learned from early on, from coming from an immigrant family, you make opportunities. So I would walk around with them all the time, and my friends said that they were going to a rave there, and I didn't want to go because I was like, I should go to the studio, but they're like, come, and I was like, I'll make it an opportunity. I'll just bring my mixtapes. And I walked into the first room, snuck on stage where the DJ was, made my way over and tried to give my CD, and that was one DJ down, and there was 4 different rooms. And I went to the next room, and Calvin Harris was playing there.
Wow.
And And this is years ago. This is over like 6-7 years ago. And I asked my friends to hold my purse, and I grabbed one CD. And I went through the crowd, and I waited till security looked the other way, and I just jumped on stage. And I waved my CD in his face, thinking it was a good idea to do that in the middle of a DJ set, which is not a good idea. But he laughed and then shook his head and took my CD. Security saw me. I ran off stage, and I jumped into the crowd, and my friends are in the back like, fuck yeah, celebrating.
And now,
then my first number one as a songwriter, because that's how I got started in LA, was as a songwriter. My first number one was with Calvin Harris and Dua Lipa.
Wow. Amazing.
That's awesome.
Yeah. Amazing. And now you have...
Viva Colombia! Hell yeah, baby!
And now you have 14 million Spotify followers.
It's crazy.
That's crazy. It's amazing. So as you're going through this journey and you're pushing and you are an entrepreneur in your own way, what do you think the challenges are that are universal? Michelle, let's start with you, that everybody is going to have when they're trying something new.
Yeah, so I think I meet a lot of entrepreneurs. Best part of my job are the people I get to work with. Second best part of my job are the customers we work with. But the third part of my job are all the great entrepreneurs I get to meet, and there's so many around the world. And I think that there's something, if you're starting a company or you're thinking about starting a company, there's one thing that I would start with is, am I solving a really meaningful problem that you really care about? And I think that that's like where you have to start. You have to solve something meaningful and ask yourself, well, why hasn't it been solved before? So you got to start there. And the second thing is, once you feel like, okay, yes, this is a meaningful problem, I really care about it, I'm passionate about it, and these are all the reasons why it's not being solved today or why I can do it better, then you ask yourself, can you assemble the team to make it happen? Because it doesn't matter how good your idea is, it's going to require assembling a team to make it come to fruition. And if you can start with those two things, then the funding will come and the media attention will come and all these other things will come. But you have to start with those two. And so I think those are really universal of what's the meaningful problem? Why isn't it being solved today? If there are already 5 companies solving it, you have to ask yourself, well, why not just go work for one of them? Like, what's going to make me different? And then you have to ask yourself, how am I going to get people to come along with me? Which really takes a lot of hustle and vision and treating people well.
So it's really about understanding people. And Jessie, you must think about the same thing. You're writing lyrics that you need to appeal to a lot of people. How do you reach that? How do you reach them?
For me personally, speaking creatively, I think a lot of it has to do with authenticity and truth. And I think that probably relates to what you said. When you find something that you're legitimately passionate about, you can't really fake the funk. And I feel like more and more, if somebody's getting well acquainted with your product or with your music, people are gonna start to just understand and feel when things are authentic and feel when things are synthetic. So I feel like it's important to just come from a place of truth. So that way, whatever you're doing is done with complete conviction and nobody can tell you different.
Yeah. When I took the job that I'm in, somebody told me that half of my job was now communication. I'm a journalist, so that's kind of obvious. But as a manager, half of the job is telling people what they need to do in a way that they appreciate and buy into. And that's what you're doing for an audience. That's what you're doing as you're hiring. Also, that's what you're doing when you're hiring a team. You were talking a little bit backstage about how important it is to have that team.
Totally.
For a creative person. Can you tell us a little bit more about how that's come together for you?
Yeah, I feel like an important part of success is not just like focusing on what your strengths are, but also realizing what your weaknesses are. And you said it, when you're building a team, you can't, it's a really basic thing, but I see adults doing it all the time when you're just not checking your ego. But the second you check your ego and you're like, no, I need this because I'm not good at that, and I need this because I'm not good at that. If someone's better at creators, or someone's better at business, or someone's better at getting funding, or things like that, and assembling the team that way, as opposed to just thinking that you're capable of doing it, or that, just respecting that.
Yeah.
And also, I think there's a lot to be said, and again, I'm talking from my perspective, speaking from my perspective as a creative, I think there's a lot to be said for finding people that aren't necessarily, like, you're not going to start with a pro. Your team's not going to be assembled of pros if you're starting from the bottom. And what I think is important to look for is for people that believe in what you're doing. Just how you said it, but legitimately believe, and not having the focus on like education or anything like that, because someone could have said that to me, and I never graduated college because I wanted to focus on music. And that's what I did. I spent 10 years, 9 years, 8 years focusing on music and developing my skills outside of school. But if someone was looking at me from the outside and saying, oh, you know what, she could have gone to school for music, she wasn't serious. That's not true. I was just taking the other route, but I'm passionate as hell, you know? So.
Absolutely. So it's about inspiring that team.
Mm-hmm.
Is there anything else that you think that this crowd, a lot of whom are thinking about their own ideas or thinking about getting started with something that is probably very scary? It's so scary to try something new. What's the wisdom that you would want them to take away with you?
I feel like there's still a lot I'm learning. So anything I share is obviously from like little things that I've learned, but I still feel like there's a lot I'm learning as I go. But if anything, I hope you can take that, like, I'm learning as I go. I've learned a long time ago, and like, excuse my language, but to be frank, not to give a fuck about what other people think if I'm failing, because at least I'm actually trying. You just need to try. You just need to fail faster and grow thick skin, because not everyone's gonna be cheering for you all the time, but as long as you have your back and you're like, no, I got this, I got this, I got this, you got it.
Mm-hmm. Yep, absolutely.
It was about 5 years ago, I was sitting at a tech conference like this in Europe, and I remember Evan Williams, the founder of Twitter, was on stage, and he said something to the effect of the following, of everyone's just making it up as they go. And then someone else had once told me, it was actually George Lee, who used to run tech banking for Goldman Sachs. He made this comment, you know, and if you think about it, he ran technology banking for Goldman Sachs. He's met every every tech founder there's ever been, he has met this person many times. And he said something to me once of, the best founders are the ones who have really high rate of learning. And so you put those things together, and that's like something I wish I had known when I was starting, of it doesn't matter if you don't know everything on day one, everyone's just making it up, and really your best asset is how fast you can learn. And so if you're going to work at a company that you're like, I really want to go work there, but I don't know anything about that role, just start reading about it and asking questions or surrounding yourself with really smart people. All of a sudden, 6 months down the road, you're like, wow, I know a lot more than when I started. And then if you're an entrepreneur, you're like, I have no earthly idea how to hire a CFO or a CTO or a VP of engineering. You know, by the way, I really need one of those to get my tech company off the ground. Just start asking people, and really quickly you have 5 conversations. You're like, actually, now I start to see some common themes. And so I think it's this high rate of learning, and everyone's just making it up. No one knows all the answers. And you can go really, really far away if you solve a meaningful problem and assemble a good team.
So you've solved meaningful problems with your company, Cloudflare. You're valued at over $1 billion now. What was a moment when you felt like, I mean, go way back, and you felt like you were making it up as you went along and discovered something you hadn't thought of yet?
Oh, it happens all the time, and it still happens today. We have 1,000 people that work at Cloudflare. And I feel like I'm still learning, just like Jessie, where there's things where you have a point of view, but you get new information, you're like, actually, this is a big aha moment. And I think early on, when I remember we were starting, there was 3 of us that started the company, we quickly grew to 6 people. And you had these ahas maybe 10 times a day. And it might be like a positive aha, like a high, followed by 3 lows, and then maybe another high, followed by, it was this huge emotional roller coaster really, really early on, where you're high and low many times a day. But what happens is as you scale and you kind of start to generate revenue, and you start to maybe get to that $10 million recurring revenue, and then you have $100 million in recurring revenue, and then you get to $1 billion in recurring revenue, like Shopify, the highs and lows are still there, but they're much more spread out. And that's your job as like a founder to build a company. It's like you want to find an idea, and then once you have the idea, you have to eventually generate revenue. That's the whole purpose. That's an important part of running a business. And these aha moments just become more far apart, but they still happen. And I think I think being open and flexible is what makes companies, you can really build an iconic company if you do that.
Jessie, do those aha moments happen for you while you're performing? Are you ever on a stage and in the back of your mind you're like, oh, I just found something?
Yeah, totally. When they happen by accident, but it's awesome when they do. Like, for example, once I was on stage and the mic stopped working during a song. And the worst thing you can do is just stop. You can't, you just have to keep going and figure it out. So the mic stopped, and I was like, well, And I just pointed the mic that way, like as if it was on, and it wasn't. And everybody went off, and I was like, this is great. All right, they're fixing it, and nobody knows. So little things like that, but you just gotta move, right? Because people could have not started singing, and then I would have just had to think of something else. But I feel like fear is the thing that you gotta eradicate. Because had I been scared to point the mic out and fearful that people wouldn't support it, then I'd have just spent another 10 seconds looking awkward on stage, not knowing what to do. But I feel like fear's your killer. You just gotta kill fear, and then you're good.
That's such a great lesson that sometimes that moment of what could be panic is also an inspiration to solve something creatively, and then you take that with you. And you probably do that at shows now regularly. You point the mic out.
Yeah,
involve
and then it becomes part of the culture. Now it's a part of the show. Now it's a part of it, and it was something that had to go wrong. And that's another thing I feel. And it's such a cliche thing to say to stay positive, but it really helps. It really helps. Like any obstacle that comes in front, just take a second and train your brain into always observing that as a challenge, as opposed to something negative. Always observe it as an opportunity to grow. Right? Which is such a cliche thing to say. Like as I say it, but it's true. It really works. It really works. Because you'll just become so accustomed to it that fear will literally die, and you'll just look at everything like an opportunity.
I think they call that the growth mindset.
The growth mindset.
I think that's what it's called. I think there you go. There you go. Exactly.
You're in the growth mindset. Well, and I think that this just reinforces the knowledge that everybody has deep down that limitations force creativity. That without limitations, and we all have them, and you've dealt with all kinds of limitations, and anybody getting started has dealt with a lot of financial limitations, and sometimes that lack of money can also be scary. Michelle, tell us how those limitations helped you make some good choices when you were getting started.
Yeah, so we raised money. Our first time we raised some money was in 2009, and I can tell you 2009 was not a good time to fundraise. It was right after the financial crisis, and it was a very different time than angel investing didn't exist, seed investing didn't exist. So we did a Series A eventually from a venture capitalist. It was the only tech investment Venrock, which was a fund firm down in Silicon Valley, did the entire year. So this money was very precious to us. We were nobodies. We showed up in Silicon Valley as nobodies, and we were able to raise a couple $1 million to prove out that we could do what we say we were going to do. We were so frugal, I can't even tell you. And I think early on, being frugal can get you a long way, because you have to engineer your way out of problems, not buy your way out of problems. And I think that really was critical to our success the first 5 years of the company. Today we are a little less frugal, which still pains me, because we have this really nice office and it just looks much different. We've raised over $300 million at this point. It's just a very different thing. But the original team that was there, you really wanted to go as far as possible. And we would just always talk about, no, we're not going to spend money on that. We're going to engineer our way out of the problem. How do you find a technical solution that can really scale globally? And that really helped us go a long way. And ultimately we were able to have a lot of traction, which then meant over time we were able to, the valuation of the company went up because we were able to do a lot with a little. And I think that was, you have to kind of lean into it, but that constraint helped us be innovative and find creative solutions.
Love it. Thank you so much for your inspiration, both of you, Jessie, Michelle.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining us for this conversation. It was a joy.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So almost 2 months ago to this day, one of Hollywood's biggest superstars revealed a different kind of project. Houseplant was announced to the world as Seth Rogen's first foray into the cannabis industry. So please welcome to the stage Kiran Wadera from Casa Verde Capital, the star and co-writers of Superbad, Knocked Up, Pineapple Express, and the co-founders of Houseplant, Evan Goldberg and Seth Rogen.
I'm good, right?
Hello. Hi.
Hi, guys.
Good evening, Toronto. Good evening, Collision.
Hello. How are you guys doing? We just wanted to start by thanking the Prime Minister for being our opening act. That was very nice of him. We asked for someone good. We were hoping maybe Rush, but then they got the Prime Minister, and he killed. So thank you so much.
Yeah. And we're available to help him out if he ever
Yeah,
needs
we'll
us.
open for him in return at any time he wants. So.
Well, guys, I'm so excited to be here tonight. My name is Karan Wadera. I'm the managing partner at Casa Verde Capital, a venture fund that focuses exclusively on the cannabis industry. And that is what we're going to talk about tonight. And I am so excited to be here with Seth and Evan. And for those of you who do not know who these two gentlemen are, one, I'd love to know where you've been for the last 20 years, but...
And I'd like to join you.
But I'm going to give a very quick synopsis, and don't get offended. I'm not going to list everything you guys have done because that would take...
Just do the good stuff.
All night. Yeah, exactly. So Seth has a number of acting credits that you're all familiar with: Freaks and Geeks, The 40-Year-Old Virgin, Knocked Up, Step Brothers, Zack and Miri, Funny People, and soon to be released, The Lion King, where you voiced the role of Pumbaa. It's exciting. And then the two of you have been behind some incredible films as writers, including Superbad, Pineapple Express, and The Green Hornet. And then your production company, Point Grey Pictures, has produced another bevy of hits: 50-50, This Is the End, Neighbors, Sausage Party, Disaster Artist, Blockers, and Long Shot, and now Long Shot, which is in theaters currently with you and Charlize Theron. So you guys have had a busy couple decades.
Yeah, and we've been stoned the whole time.
So...
Not right now, though.
Not right now. No, of course not.
That'd be crazy.
That'd be insane.
So we are going to talk about cannabis. That is why we're here. But before we do that, in getting to know you guys over the last couple of months, it's been really interesting to understand this friendship and partnership that's actually been there since childhood.
Yeah.
How does that develop, and more importantly, how do you maintain a partnership like that over the course of so many years? Because I'm sure it's not easy.
No, it's not easy. No, it's very actually. We met each other in bar mitzvah class, so we were 12 years old.
So we had the mutual Jewishness to
exactly,
bond over,
yeah, which is
initially.
And we very quickly saw that we had the same creative ambitions. And when you're a very, very young person like that, it's not something you see that often. And so when you are the weird 12-year-old kid who secretly wants to be a writer, and you meet another weird 12-year-old kid who secretly wants to be a writer, you very quickly bond over that. And
that bonding for us was watching movies.
Yeah.
Movies are what brought us together. We just had the same taste
Exactly.
and the same interest in how they were made and how they were written and the messages they had.
Yeah, and we went to high school across the street from a Rogers Video, and we would go and rent movies all the time, and we really developed a love of movies and started working together writing Superbad when we were 13 years old, and really committed very hard to pursuing that as a career path at a very, very, very young age. Yeah, and I think because of that, our creative sensibilities really developed together.
I think we literally developed a codependency where
Exactly.
we are not fully functional without each other
No.
when it comes to a lot of it.
We
And
made a
that's
whole
not
movie about
joke
it.
at
Yeah,
all.
no, it's not a joke. Yeah.
We were teenagers. Our brains formed in a similar manner over similar topics.
I wish I did not rely on him as much as I...
I want to be my own man.
Exactly. You'll never be. We're linked forever. I'm sorry.
But then, I think it's one thing when you're younger and, you have a ton of ambition and, creativity kind of pours out of you. How have you been able to maintain that, specifically from a point of creativity? How do you stay inspired?
I mean, the number one thing is just passionate things we're passionate about.
Yeah, we work on things that we ourselves would love.
And every time we don't, it goes bad.
It goes badly, yeah, and that is in every element of what we do. It's the one guiding principle we keep coming back to is what is, if we saw it out there in the world, we would be like, yes, I want that. I want to watch it or whatever the product is. And what even to the next level that's a little that I'm not proud of. It's like, what would I be jealous of if I saw other people doing with movies, especially? That's how I think of it. Is if I read a script or have an idea, it's like, oh, the best part about this is if I didn't get to be the one to do it, I would be so jealous of the person who did. And that has really guided a lot of our choices is that.
Got it. Now, let's talk about cannabis. That was a quick, let's get right into it.
Yeah.
What role has cannabis played in your lives, not just as individuals, but also as creators?
A big role. Yeah, I mean, we're from Vancouver, British Columbia, which is, so we grew up in an environment, at least in our insulated, area that we grew up in, that it was very accepted. It was around, and it was socially.
That, like, as kids, we didn't comprehend.
Yeah,
we thought a lot of the world was like that, and we didn't realize Vancouver was kind of special.
It was, and then I moved to Los Angeles and saw that it really, when I was 16, I moved to LA, 17, and I found that it was culturally viewed very differently there, and it filled a much different role in culture there than it did in Vancouver, and I really saw that we had an opportunity with our work to help make people view it the same way that we viewed it, and that it was a really additive part of our day-to-day lives, and so I would talk about it on talk shows all the time in a way that every talk show host has come to me, and David Letterman came to me once, and I was just like, why do you keep asking me about this? I've talked about it so much on your show, and he's like, because no one else will talk about it, and I know other people, it's a part of their lives, but he's like, I'm just fascinated that you're willing to talk about it. And at the same time, we were being very productive. We were producing a lot of movies and making a lot of movies, which also I think was playing against the stigma of someone who used as much weed as I did, and do. And then we really tried to start incorporating it into our work in a way that also kind of broke some of those stigmas. 4-Year-Old Virgin is an interesting one because there's a scene where me and Paul Rudd are playing video games and we're smoking weed and we're talking about other stuff, but it was actually one of the first scenes in a movie where people are smoking weed and they're not commenting on it. It is just a part of what they're doing, and they aren't pariahs on society. They're just people hanging out, and weed, it's as though they're having a glass, they're drinking or something like that. And that was, I always viewed that as a big step in a good direction. And then, the meantime, we were writing Pineapple Express, basically.
Yeah, Pineapple Express was the moment where we realized how many people love cannabis and enjoy it, and it makes a difference to their lives, and they feel like it's a normal part of their lives. And it was the first film that was like a giant financial win for a studio that was about cannabis. They were always small, weird movies for stoners, about stoners.
Yeah.
And this was just, it put it in a different lens that I think cinema never had.
It was a real movie with a real budget, and it
was a comedy, but it didn't treat it like a joke.
No, and it had a story, and it was like a very thoughtful, analysis of the dynamic between like a drug dealer and someone that they sell drugs to, and it's to this day by far the movie that the most people come up to both of us telling us they like, and I think it's because it really appealed to all these people who were forced to secretly love weed and not themselves be able to talk about it or not have it be a part of the culture that they were ingesting and that other people were ingesting in a way that they truly related to. So I think we saw that it was weirdly cathartic for a lot of people to see this big piece of pop culture that was accepted in mainstream pop culture that was all about cannabis, and the relationship between people who use it in different ways,
And now,
there you go.
Yeah.
Thank you, Prime Minister Trudeau.
And so has the challenge gotten a lot easier now, the ability to do it? Because you're right. I mean, I don't think many people knew that about 40-Year-Old Virgin. Obviously, Pineapple Express, you know, a critical part of the subject matter. You've talked about it on talk shows. I've seen you do things even online in, you know, recent years on platforms like Mary Jane, and now you're starting a brand.
Yeah.
Let's talk about that. Tell us about Houseplant.
Houseplant is our cannabis brand. We are currently only available in British Columbia. It's where we're from. You know, like I said a lot earlier, it's been a huge part of our lives forever, and we really wanted to try to help facilitate bringing that to as many people as wanted it, you know, and doing it in a way that reflected our values and our sensibilities in every way we could. And we found very quickly that we were actually able to put a lot of ourselves into the product and into the branding, as you would say, and it became a very creatively gratifying experience because we had a few things that we wanted to focus on. One was education, making it accessible for people who were new to it, and the other was kind of reverence or elevation, I guess you would say. You know, I think it's a product that we have a lot of reverence for, and it's something that's traditionally been hidden under people's coffee tables or in the back of your drawer or something like that. And we wish it was something that you were proud to display. Not just that you didn't have shame in displaying, but one step above that, that you were actually proud to own and proud to display. It's like not even normalization, but elevation, I think, is something that we were interested in and are interested in, because it's not just a normal thing to me, it's better than that, you know? So those were really the things we talked the most about, is education, design, and how to marry those things, which we, I think, did in a very simple yet effective way, which is something we're very proud of with the product and the brand. Yeah,
and it's something we've been working on for years and years.
Yeah, talk to us about that, because I don't think people understand how long it takes to build a brand in general, but when you're talking about cannabis, when you're talking about Canada, where you guys are from, and decided to launch, what was that process like, and what have the challenges been?
It was long.
It was a long process. The first process was defining the brand and the company in a way that we were proud of and did these things that we liked. And the second was taking time to navigate the regulations in a way that allowed us to create a company that would be long-lasting and something that we could be proud of, and something that, again, we knew we were holding up to the strictest standards, because anyone who is in the cannabis space here knows that there is a lot of guidelines involved in what you can do, what you can say. And it actually very quickly became a really interesting creative exercise of how can we function within this box, these guidelines, how do we keep to them in the most strict way we possibly can, and still make it seem effortless and not make it seem like there's any guidelines we're adhering to. Make it just seem like it's exactly what the company itself wants to be.
Yeah, and our commitment to education aligned with that really nicely, where design and education kind of collided. Even within all these regulations, we managed to create a design that lends itself to informing the customers what they're getting and how it's to be used.
Exactly, so just giving each strain its own simple color palette, and then within that giving each color palette a logo that has lines that correspond to kind of the desired effects of each strain. You know, I think those simple things really lent themselves to a design that we think is very beautiful and something we would be proud to display, and also is starting to educate people on the different types of cannabis.
Yeah, because a lot of people think that they had a bad experience with cannabis because of the cannabis, but a lot of the time it's you're not using it right, you're not using it in the right manner, in the right location.
And so we started making educational videos, and that was another thing that...
Yeah, I mean, if people haven't seen the Houseplant Instagram, it's pretty incredible, and it's, you know, we in our seat see brands and pitches all the time. I don't think we've ever seen something, you know, so thoughtful in these certain manners, and can certainly attest to the elevation of that. Talk also about the how you've been able to marry sort of music into that as well, because I know that's a big part of it as well.
Well, I think a lot of the brand to us was how can we help bring this company to life in ways other than just the cannabis flower, And again, in a world where there are marketing restrictions, things like that, a lot of regulations, again, it became an exercise in creativity. So one of the first things we thought of is we created vinyl records that were strain specific, and they each had a mix of songs that were kind of made to, at least in theme, go along with the different strains of cannabis, and each one also was designed with the same color palette as our strains. So it to us was, again, a very simple way of associating the strains with certain activities, certain times of day, certain uses, while playing into the design and what we think is just beautiful about the product itself, and something that, again, we would be proud to display in our homes. So it's a lot of boxes to tick, but I think we found a way to do it that we ourselves were proud of, yeah.
Evan, how has this creative process differed, or what are the similarities to creating films and television shows? And then also talk about, you guys make these really interesting instructional videos, which is kind of like a throwback to the 70s, PSAs that we used to see maybe when we were kids. What's that process been like?
I mean, this is extremely different than our other industry that we tend to work in, but a lot of similar things apply: design and communication to audience and all that. But it was an energizing thing to just be put into a similar but extremely different arena where those skills could be applied, but completely differently.
Yeah.
And it was fun to experiment with just like singular images and like actual like packaging, which was something in film we never got to do.
Exactly. Yeah, and I think as far as education goes, again, it's been very gratifying to have a very legitimate way of putting out things that we have always thought were important. Portion control was a video that we made that we're very proud of.
And that video has a very simple part in it where it expresses, take it slow.
Take it very slow.
And these are the kind of things that everyone takes for granted that you shouldn't take for granted. Some people will go to these stores and purchase these things and
no one's telling them,
don't know.
No one's saying, like, take one hit and then wait and see what happens.
And they buy a pre-roll or something like that, and they think this is 1 unit of cannabis.
Exactly.
And it is not.
No, it's not at all. And so I think, like, education is something that, in order to create customers that trust us more and a brand that we are proud of and, again, is trusted, we're trying to not just hopefully have a good product that is pretty, but to let people understand how to use it in a way that is the most conducive to their enjoyment. Even if that means using much less of the product,
sure.
We want that rather than them having a negative experience.
And we want to make sure that, like, connoisseurs like us, like longtime users, love it, but also that my mom can go into a store and she'll be directed to Houseplant because of how accessible it is.
Exactly, that it's accessible and warm and simple, and again, based on education and inviting new people into it, Yeah.
So you currently have one strain which is available in your hometown of Vancouver. When will it be in the rest of Canada? When is Houseplant coming to the U.S.?
It's available in all of British Columbia right now.
Yeah.
Okay.
So online and at retailers.
Yeah. We have a meeting with OCS tomorrow, so we plan on hopefully.
Hopefully.
We would like. We're announcing that we would soon be liking to announce that we are available in Ontario.
But we're taking it slow because we never want to run out of our product. We want to make sure that we're ready for wherever we're going.
But we are building inventory for Ontario right now, and our plan is to come to Ontario next after British Columbia, and we are excited to do that very much so. Yeah.
And then what about your friends down south in the U.S.? When can we expect Houseplant in stores there?
It touches actually on something that also is happening here in Canada right now in America. We would love to come to America. We live in America for the most part, and unfortunately, right now we are not 100% comfortable with the climate in America as far as its legality and how people are being treated still in as far as how the war on drugs is being enforced in America. But rather than just sit around and hope that it gets better, we are going to take a very active role in creating a climate in America that we feel comfortable being available in. And so we're starting to work with a lot of organizations in America, again, to deal with people with records and employment and trying to fix the wrongs that have happened during the war on drugs. And it's a very similar thing here in Canada. I think a lot of progress has been made, obviously, and a lot of headway has been made, but there is still not enough being done in our eyes. To be specific, there's a bill, C-93, that is going up to be voted on that we feel needs to be amended. Right now it calls for the pardons for people with minor offenses and possession, and we think that it should call for the deletion of records for people with nonviolent and minor offenses. So if there's any politicians that happen to be here tonight, maybe that would be something to work on, is amending that bill and passing that bill. If there's MPs.
And non-politicians, you can reach out to your MPs.
Yeah, reach out to your MP and bring it up because, again, there's a lot of people who are still, being very negatively impacted by a war on drugs that has ended, and there are people who are now doing things 100% legally that are that people's lives are being very negatively affected by, even though what they did is no longer a crime. And we think that we take that very seriously. We care about it very deeply, and it's ingrained in what Houseplant is, I think, from the ground up. Yeah,
that's great.
Great.
We only have a couple of minutes left, and I mean, thank you so much for bringing that up around sort of the corporate social responsibility around Houseplant. Do you think, again, we sit at an interesting seat and we get to see a lot of interesting people benefiting off of the growth of this industry, and obviously it's negatively impacted so many. What more can even brands and cannabis companies in the U.S. be doing, and what should we be, how can we sort of join this with you on that end and sort of ensure that it's an inclusive industry for everyone?
I think specifically trying to hire people who have been unfairly targeted by this war on drugs. It generally targets marginalized groups at a exponential rate. Even though every group of people uses cannabis the same amount, if you're a minority, you're like several times more likely to be arrested for having it. And in America especially, it can be outrageously detrimental to your life. So I think the thing that everyone can start to do is hire people who would be deemed unhireable because of these offenses, and to walk the walk and not just talk the talk. And that's something that in Canada we can all do as well. Until their records are deleted, we can make the fact that they haven't yet been deleted meaningless by ignoring the fact that they have these things on their records and hiring them anyway. And again, I think that's something that can be impactful today, not as a hypothetical hope in the future. Yeah. How's it going?
Well, I think that's a great place to end. Thank you guys so much for what you've done as fans and also for the cannabis industry. And we're looking forward to we can have Houseplant more widely available soon.
So are we.
Thank you for having us. Yeah.
Thank you so much.
So, we've heard from some incredible founders and entrepreneurs who have shared their success stories with us tonight. They've given us such great advice. But before we move on, I'd like to take a moment to recognize all the startups from Canada who are part of Collision this year. So if we could all put your hands together as we welcome up on stage the many incredible Canadian startups that help make Collision possible. Let's hear it for them. Everyone up on stage. Hey. How are you doing?
So, I hope you've all had a fantastic evening so far. Have you had a good evening? And hopefully you all will be heading to Night Summit a little later, and we'll see you all bright and early at 8 a.m. tomorrow morning. So moving Collision to Toronto really has been a pretty incredible decision for us, and genuinely, Sunil, well, you're not taking a selfie. I'd just like to say thank you for pestering me for years and persuading me, us, the whole team, eventually to make the decision. It's been an incredible decision and one that we're eternally grateful for. So Mayor John Tory also played a huge role in persuading us to make Toronto and not San Francisco Collision's new home. So please put your hands together and give a huge warm welcome to the Mayor of Toronto, John Tory.
Oh, there you are.
Hooray!
How are you? Well, Patty, thank you, and good evening, ladies and gentlemen. First of all, I want to set the record straight on something. Patty said earlier on that Sunil and maybe my passion for the Raptors, which is very real, by the way, and if you want to go over to Jurassic Park tomorrow night, which is what we call the place in front of the arena, you're welcome there, that was the deciding factor in getting Collision to come here. It wasn't that at all. It was the presence in my office on a shelf in a place of honor of a rugby ball signed by the Canadian women's rugby team. And he said, any mayor that can have a rugby ball in his office, we're moving the conference. That's how these decisions are made. But I want to welcome you all to Toronto. We are absolutely amazed to have you here and to see this event finally thriving in our city. And I thank you very much for coming. We brought Collision to Toronto because we knew it would do a lot for the city, but we hope it will do a lot for you as well. And we are determined to keep growing this sector. We're determined to do it in a way that is different. I could give you all the numbers, and I'll give you a few in terms of some of the investments we saw in 1 month alone last year. But what's really important here in Toronto is that we're trying to do things differently, and the Prime Minister made quite a few references to that during his remarks. And it doesn't mean it's better, it doesn't mean it's worse, it just means it's different. And we wanted to be a part of one of the fastest growing conferences in the world because we felt that a lot of Collision would rub off on Toronto, and we hoped a little bit of Toronto would rub off on Collision, this now being the 4th largest tech market in all of North America. So it's your opportunity this week to learn about tech innovation from each other and for us to learn from you. And our city is booming. Our city is booming. In 1 month, the month of September, last year, we saw $1.4 billion of investment come from some of the major international companies, and they came here because they knew that we had the startup community that we have. I'm so proud of the people here. These are people from across Canada, but they're part of a startup community in this country that has attracted the global investors to come here. And we don't look at it as either or. We look at it as both. And I think that's one of the reasons why Collision wanted to be here. But I also wanted to make sure that you understood that beyond the numbers, because there's a lot that goes beyond the numbers, we are trying to do it differently here. We're trying to do it differently. We are trying to make sure that diversity here is a fact. 51% of the people who live in this city were born outside of Canada. That's a fact. The goal is inclusion. The goal is inclusion that spreads across the population of the city as a whole, but also make sure that the tech sector is not left out of that. And that means a focus that we've placed first and foremost on women in tech. Jody Kovitz is here from a great organization called Move the Dial. And she's worked hard, and her organization has worked hard. I can see Jody has some fans here But she's worked hard and the organization's worked hard, but we have helped as civic leaders, and I'm delighted to be joined tonight by some of the members of Toronto City Council and one of our deputy mayors. But we've worked hard by saying, as she requested we do, we won't come to events where the panels don't have proper representation of women and where the audiences are not going to have proper representation of women. And she tells me it's made a difference, and we're going to continue to make that difference. And we're also making an effort to make sure that the sector, the ecosystem that we're so proud to have here is one that is representative of the population in which it finds itself. And so that means that we embrace people, regardless of their race or their nationality, their skin color, their faith, their sexual orientation. We need everybody in this sector, and that's part of the DNA that is making Toronto work as a city and that is making the tech sector work. Everybody is included, everybody is embraced, everybody is an important part of what we're trying to build here. And I want to just conclude on one last really important note, because it's the other thing we're trying to do, and again, Prime Minister Trudeau made reference to this in his remarks earlier on. And that is that we're trying to make sure that the tech ecosystem here helps us not just to generate jobs, and they've been a huge job creator, thousands and thousands of new jobs last year. It's not just producing investment. It's not just producing profits, which are a good thing, because fairly taxed, they can support the programs that we invest in here, many of which Mr. Trudeau made reference to. But it's because we're asking the sector to go beyond dollars and cents and jobs and investment, as important as they are, and help us to use the power of the technology, the power of the smart people to advance our social interests and to build a better city here. So I thank you very much for being here. I should tell you one last thing. In the interest of full, plain, and true disclosure, we have a new bylaw. Seth made reference to legislation making its way through the House of Commons. We have a bylaw here that requires that your suitcases be inspected when you leave the airport. And this is in order to make sure you've done enough shopping while you're here. So I'm telling you about this to avoid awkward moments at the airport. If you could do the shopping, then you won't be sent back down. You'll be able to catch your flight and go home. So I hope you have a wonderful time in the city. We're thrilled to have Collision here. We thank Patty and the whole team and Sunil for bringing it here, and I hope you have a great time. Thank you very much.
Both of you come in here. It's time. I'd just like to ask Mayor Tory, would you join me to start the countdown to Collision 2019? Is there a countdown? Here it goes.
I think they think we can count. You ready?
Thank you. Amazing. Thanks a million to absolutely everybody who came this evening. We're thrilled to be here, and we're looking forward to tomorrow. See you all in the morning. Have a great night.